Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. I know a number of you guys are joining through our Facebook page because this time we're live. We've got Ken Pierce here and Paul Ruby. Paul's the attorney, and Ken's from West Virginia Regional Center for the Apple Mountain Project. So, one of the reasons we wanted to have this webinar was I was getting a lot of questions in terms of what ChatGPT thinks about a number of the EB5 projects, and really wanted Ken, Mark, and Paul to explain, what happens when you do due diligence on AI and what it shows and what realistically you should be looking for. Because technically, a lot of people raise questions that Chat or Claude asked, but they're good questions. However, if you are going to be investing a huge amount of money with EB5 from 800 and all the other extra fees that are included, then it's really important that you ask the right questions and you do know how to do the right due diligence on the project. So as you know, it's BLS. We've obviously been in EB5 for a very long time. I can see a few familiar names. We're expecting a few more people to join. And what I would advise you to do is ask a lot of questions. There is a question icon. And of course, I'm going to be monitoring a lot of the questions that are coming through our Facebook feed, because I guess there's a lot of people that's gone through there. And then we will answer as many questions as we can. But however, it's important that you hear from Ken and Paul in terms of AI and, of course, what's the latest update with EB5. Ken, if I pass over to you and you can take it over from here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sam. Thank you and your team for putting this together for the West Virginia Regional Center. So, my name is Ken Pierce. I'm the director of the West Virginia Regional Center. Together, Marc Weintraub and I own and operate the West Virginia Regional Center. So, just a little something about us. So, we've been a USCIS designated and approved regional center since 2013. Apple Mountain EB5 is our third project, and we're excited to bring this, pre-approved rural project to the market and work with BLS, to help promote it. With us this evening, we also have Paul Ruby, who's, our preferred immigration attorney. But what I wanted to do just briefly is kind of give a quick history of our project, and then I'll kind of pass it over to Paul to kind of talk a little bit about, what we're finding in this new age of AI when we start, using AI to do searches, regarding EB5 visa, EB5 projects, and other things. So, anyways, we began working on this project back in 2019. In 2020, the regional center program, expired, but we also had, COVID hit. The developers of this project went ahead and raised capital, money, investors, and went ahead and started the construction of a 60-acre high-density apple orchard in eastern Kentucky. So the virtual background you see behind me is an actual picture of the apple orchard. You can go see it, you can touch it, you can visit it at any time. So during that period of planting, so normally when you plant a high density apple orchard, you plant you plant saplings. So you don't actually plant seeds, but trees are actually 3 to 4 feet tall. But it still takes 2 to 3 years for those trees to start producing fruit. So this apple orchard is actually getting ready to have its third harvest. So we have 120,000 trees with bushels and bushels of unripe apples, and those apples will be harvested next month. The plan for the apple orchard is basically an expansion. So we're going to take it from 60 acres up to 1,000 acres. And then the next phase we'll be planting another 100 acres in the spring of 2027. So what's great about this project is we also, the last 2 years when we had the harvest, we sold all of the apples. So essentially a lot of the business risk is done with this project. We know that the land supports apple tree growth. We know that we can produce high quality Gala apples, and we know we can sell those apples. So anyways, so without any further ado, let me turn it over to Paul for a quick introduction, and then he'll kind of take us through a little bit of AI.
Great. Hi, everyone. As Sam said at the beginning, please don't be shy about putting questions into the chat that you have. We may not get to them immediately, but we will get to them kind of like after the discussion is done. And it's helpful to have them up, if they are touching on something that we are discussing and kind of answer them organically as we go through. But anyway, my name is Paul Ruby. I'm a business immigration lawyer. I've been doing this almost 20 years. I live and work in Nashville, Tennessee, but obviously the immigration laws of the US are federal, so they're established, they're the same everywhere. We work with people in the US, non-immigrant and immigrant visas, hundreds and hundreds of EB-5 cases at all stages in my career. I've obtained dozens of project approvals, not quite hundreds yet, but a few dozen, covering, of course, hundreds of investors. And anyway, I organized the project application, what's called a Form I-956F here, that we were able to get approved for this project. We'll talk about how kind of like the processes here work and why the project pre-approval is so critical. But I think probably we'll spend the first, maybe 20 minutes or so just going through some chat GPT stuff. It'd be pretty similar if you're using Claude or any of the other tools. And look, I use these things every day. I find the AI tools to be the fastest way to, find information, synthesize things from disparate sources, and feel confident you're getting good information. One thing I will say is that changes in EB5 come at a glacial pace and are not quick. And there are a lot of people out there who want to be publishing things, and many of them are helpful. Probably at the time they were written, almost all of them were helpful. But some of the information we get that's on the internet still is quite antiquated. That's picked up in AI, searches and agents and everything. But anyway, what we'll do right now is I typed in what the first question is going to be, and you'll see it in just a second or two once I get it up. We'll share that
Share your
screen.
screen.
Yep, there we go. That should have everything. Um, Good. And so, what I put into ChatGPT, which is just please ignore all prior EB5 related chats we have had. Please review, consider, and provide analysis on the comparative benefits and drawbacks of the various EB5 investment types, rural high unemployment, TEA, and non-TEA to the extent relevant. Please also focus on considerations an India-born person may have when choosing a project type, particularly one in the US in H-1B status with an approved I-140, but a faraway priority date under EB2 or EB3. When we have these calls at 7 o'clock for me, 8 o'clock for some of you, maybe 5 o'clock for others, but when we have them at night US time, this is who the audience customarily is. And so anyway, what it came back as was, and I put this up just like 5 minutes before we started. It's not curated in any way, so this is what you would be getting if you put in similar things. It discusses the priority date situation. If you're in H-1B status, you know this. Perhaps not as well as I do, but more intimately, and it affects your life more significantly. And we want to be, of course, conscious of that. One of the big things it says first is just that the rural set aside, it currently has no cutoff date in the visa bulletin. It's published monthly by the Department of State and used also by USCIS as to when adjustments of status can be filed and so on. It notes that 20% of the annual queue or quota for EB5 visas is set aside for the rural TEA projects, half that only to urban high unemployment. And then, of course, up to 68% can go to unreserved or non-TEA projects, although it would not be that amount because of the per country, category, the per country caps. China and England, or in India rather, are, whatever, 20% each of the world's population or something, perhaps a little more. And there's a cap in any that no country can take up more than 7% of the immigrant visas given out. So anyway, it does a comparison of, is there a reserved category? Is there priority processing? This is another critical thing to consider. If you're in the US and you're doing EB-5, what you need is certainty. That's the reason to be coming up with and cobbling together and putting this amount of money up is you're here, you're settled. The priority date situation in H-1B is what it is. We've seen how Congress works on immigration, and it seems unlikely that quotas or timelines or processes will change meaningfully anytime soon. And that's a major benefit to the rural projects like this one. They get what's called priority processing. At USCIS, that's not quite as good as the premium processing service. It's available in some categories, but it means that your case will be prioritized. There's a separate queue for the rural projects and and frankly, all others. I don't know whether they put more people on it or what they do, but they get to the rural projects, significantly quicker than, any others. Visa availability, which we just talked about. India is marked as unavailable and exhausted in this month's visa bulletin. Both rural and high unemployment TEAs are current right now. They mentioned concurrent filing, which would be if you're in the US under H-1B status, which is a dual intent status, as you know. Nothing would hold you back from filing for adjustment of status quickly. Within a few months, you should get what's called an employment authorization document that will precede the I-526E approval. That would, if you choose, you can maintain the H-1B status, but if, God forbid, something does happen with employment, you would be able to not be beholden to the 60-day grace period, that frankly impacts anyone with, job loss in the H-1B context. And so that's really a critical thing is, that it's an insurance policy against career changes and not to feel the need like you're scrambling to find another H-1B position within those 60 days. The last 2 to 3 weeks of that could be, maddening to a degree. And certainly we empathize with that. And, as you can see under this comparison chart, it says, is it best for Indian H-1Bs? Rural is usually, and that's, I think, largely because of the expedited processing of locking in the I-526E approval and also the ability to file concurrently and get the EAD, kind of averting the potential for the doomsday scenario that we'd all hope and want to avoid. I think what's going to be underneath, and I haven't looked at it yet, but it looks like it's just largely what I said, already in these. This is helpful though. What are the drawbacks of rural projects? Many of you, I think, have seen the documents for this project. You've seen the I-956F approval. It says your project is in a rural area. If you went there, you wouldn't need a USCIS notice to tell you that. It is farmland. Used to be mining land, but it's farmland. It's very much farmland. In Eastern Kentucky, there are not major cities there, and its best use is agriculture right now. There are fewer projects out there in the rural areas. We've seen some of them. There's a lot of home building ones, and some in resort communities and so on. But there's very few rural projects out there, especially and critically those with the I-956F project approval. I'm going to divert on a sidetrack on that for a moment or two, because I think it's important. But the I-956F approval is critical. A EB-5 project that is pooling investments and affiliated with a regional center is able to solicit and enroll investors, and they can file forms I-526E even without a project approval. Now, USCIS has said they will not advance those individual investor petitions ahead of approving the project. They must, under their policies, approve the project first before they'll even, review and adjudicate, approve, hopefully, the I-526Es. That is not the case when the project's already been approved by USCIS, as this has, and of course others out there. But seeking out approved projects, that USCIS has approved already, is, I think, a critical due diligence step throughout your decision-making process, because what it essentially means is USCIS has already reviewed the business plan, the economic report. They think they meet the standards. They've reviewed all the offering documents, the partnership agreement, the offering memo or PPM, whatever you'd like to call it, subscription agreement, escrow agreement, perhaps. Those are compliant with the USCIS rules. There have been some other, business documents and so on, that they will have reviewed. And those are, again, everything's approved. So what that means is that when you file your I-526E, you're filing the project approval, some corporate documents, some things you've signed, and then USCIS will, accept those as pre-approved. They do not review them again when the project's been approved, and they will focus pretty much entirely on your source of funds. And that's, of course, going to be different for everyone. We understand the USCIS rules, how they look at these things, and that's a critical component. But when going into a pre-approved project, rural or not, any pre-approved project, I just tell people, perhaps 85% of the work is already done. It may not feel like that to you. The 15% that's your source of funds is going to feel invasive and like digging up everything, that you have in your possession, and things you didn't know you needed, you're going to have to find. And it's a lot of work, and there's no two ways around that. But the other 85% is already done, and it's already been approved by USCIS. And so that is, a benefit. But we're still in the drawback state here. They do talk about fewer projects, which is valid. There are fewer rural projects than others. Geographic considerations are, another one. I think the point here is that the rural projects may be in industries with which many people are not as familiar. It does discuss then both advantages and, I assume, disadvantages of the urban projects. They mentioned there's no priority processing, the smaller reserve, and then non-TEA. Basically, they say the project, if you have an amazing project, it could have good investment security, but there are massive drawbacks connected to the others. Special considerations for an Indian-born, H-1B holder. We've kind of touched on a lot of this already, just because I think it came up kind of organically in our discussion. But these are all, these are personal decisions. These aren't investment decisions at a certain point. When you're thinking, how long do I have in H-1B? Is my I-140 approved, giving me essentially indefinite renewals, even down to if you have kids, were they born in the US versus born in India? Because that could change the calculus to some degree. I think this is an interesting sort of thing, but it says risk tolerance should drive project selection. And then, this is where I worry about ChatGPT. And like I said, I haven't read this yet. But what I would tell an India-born H-1B professional considering EB-5, it'd be this. But again, I say sometimes I think that ChatGPT is glib or taking somewhat non-current information. But again, the rural high unemployment TEA, we have less of a risk of that just because the law only came into effect, in 2022 and has been kind of evolving since then. But anything on the rural urban high unemployment distinction will be from the past few years and largely unchanged. One thing that it does mention, and I think this is critical, and it, suggests that the best time to get started on something like this was yesterday. The second best time is today, and tomorrow's a lot better than the day after that. Obviously an overstatement, but you get the point. One thing is what the future demand for these categories is. Rural and high unemployment TEA categories are current for India right now and everywhere, but it doesn't guarantee they'll remain that way indefinitely as more India-born H-1B workers and Chinese investors choose reserved projects, meaning high unemployment urban TEAs or rural projects. Backlogs could eventually develop there as well. The uncertainty lies in when, not whether, the demand will increase enough to impact visa availability. I would just say, based on the numbers I've seen, there's sooner rather than later going to be a cutoff date implemented for China high unemployment. I think most likely India will follow in high unemployment not too far beyond that. And then rurals will be later. It says if you're evaluating projects rather than category, approach them with due diligence. Yeah, I mean, this just says things to think about are the immigration strength. So what does that mean? It means basically a project pre-approval, right? Like we can't go person by person in a large call and go through how good everybody's source of funds are and still stay within the time limit, nor do I think you'd want to discuss that. But immigration strength basically means the pre-approval of the project. Is it, under construction and in development already? Is there proof of concept? Do we feel confident it's going to do the job creation that's necessary to not just get the I-526E approved, but also get the subsequent 829, remove the conditions, and get your permanent green cards, setting you on the path to citizenship? What's the financial security and profile? We can talk about that in a moment or two. Developer quality and repayment likelihood. I think 2 and 4 essentially the same. But these are the sorts of considerations we have in any of these things. I think Ken, Sam, tell me what you think, or Mark, if we want to get into what is ChatGPT finding about the Apple Mountain project, or do you want me to go in a different direction?
There's questions. If you like any of those questions, there's some attorney questions.
Yeah. I'll take the screen share off so I can see the thing. Sorry, I just had the screen share and then the tiling of our pictures, so I didn't have the chat or the questions up.
Maybe we can start working through a few questions real quick and then see if we can also discuss some other things. But the first question we have is, who's the developers and the experience? So as you guys know, with an EB-5 project, the project has to be sponsored by a regional center. So we are the regional center that's sponsoring this project. The developer is Appalachia. And they are, and so to talk a little bit, the company behind it is Booth Energy, which is the actual mining company that owns the land. They actually donated the land into Appalachia. And what they did is they brought in Bruce Rash, who's also a partner. Bruce and his family, they're 6th-generation apple farmers from Michigan. And so Bruce and his team have been overseeing the design, the layout, the planting, and the training and the maintenance of the apple orchard. And so Bruce and his family have huge, extensive background. So it's important to have a good operator, but also that to have a strong financial partner. So up to this point, almost all of this project has been financed by the developer and their partners. So I hope that
And
answers. Go ahead.
And I think one of the critical things is, the gentleman that is in charge of Booth Energy is named Jim Booth or James Booth. He's well known in the energy um, space, but more critically than that, Booth Energy is a large organization and it has skilled professionals. And I know their CFO of the entire operation is on calls with Ken, Mark, Sam, and I, and others on a weekly basis. So these are real, true, sophisticated professionals that are managing a lot of the back end and back office of, and finance of the project and its execution. There's some proof of concept that I'll speak to in a moment. And then, in addition to Bruce Rash and his daughter primarily being very experienced, builders and growers of profitable, dwarf apple orchards. There's a team on site, Ryan, who's also on the calls with us, Ryan Wilson, that are local folks that know the area. They know the weather and the soil. They're experienced in agriculture. And then going back to what I said about the sophistication of the organization and the operation, if you've seen some of the documents, you've seen things about the cool storage facility, what they call the pack house, where there's a huge piece of equipment that you just dump the apples into, and then it sorts them by size, pulls out the ones that are maybe damaged and need to go be sold for a lesser amount because they'll be turned into juice, or maybe the peeled potatoes you get with a kid's Happy Meal at McDonald's, or apples, yeah, kid's Happy Meal. But the pack house itself is the subject of state and federal grants to build it. It's going to create jobs, of its own. The state and federal governments are behind it to the tune of several $1 million, through a public competitive bidding process. This is not, like backroom dealings or anything. This is all stuff that's in the open, well known. When they did the first 60 acres planted and had an unveiling, the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, was there, and gave a dedication and spoke briefly. All this is covered in the news, and we have, links or, print PDFs that we can send out on all this. But this is, the developer track record is critical in anything like this. But what I want to get across, in response to this question is just how sophisticated the organizations here are that are managing this. Because between Mark, Ken, and I, we can do the legal paperwork, we can follow all the rules, we can keep everyone's EB-5 process safe and intact and do a really wonderful job with that. If you ask me to build and manage an orchard, especially of this size and scope, I don't think I'm insulting Ken and Mark by saying we would have a very hard time with it and probably not be the best fits for that sort of thing. But the people involved, like we can manage the EB5 side of things, and the people involved are a sophisticated, experienced group with a deep bench that's talented and able to do everything that's going to be necessary throughout the life cycle of this project and execute it to perfection as they have with the first 60 acres.
Okay. Ken, do you want because there's a question for you, Paul.
Yep.
Ken, do you want to answer the move?
Well, I thought maybe we'd stick to the questions regarding the project, and we'll get to several questions for you, Paul, regarding more legal style questions. So,
Yep.
What is the exit and developers' equity in this project, and how much did you buy the land in the current value? All right. So again, going back, the land was one of the partners is Booth Energies. So Booth Energies put the land into the deal. The value of the land is actually in the value of the trees and the production of that fruit, the apples. So the more apples that are produced, the more valuable the land is.
But you invested in the pack house, right? The pack house has got a lot of value.
So the pack house, the value of the pack house is so the last two harvests, they basically, because they didn't have the pack house, they had to sell their apples at apple market at wholesale rates in August when every other apple farm was selling there. So they weren't able to get the best market price. With the pack house, they're able to pack, sort, and store the apples so they can now sell them in January, February, and get premium pricing for those apples. And so that's why it's a significant development. For an EB5 investor and for the job creation portion, it also adds more permanent jobs. And it also, a lot of the rural projects, the jobs are all literally construction jobs, which have a lower multiplier when regional centers are using their economic models. Agriculture and industrial jobs, which our project has a higher multiplier, which creates more jobs which makes it, more, makes it so that we have the job cushion that you guys need to make sure that you get your permanent visa a few years later. The equity, so far, the investors have put over $10 million into the project. And the EB5 capital is basically being used to expand the apple orchard. So the land is already tied up to grow up to 1,000 acres with the partner with Booth Energies, so which is really nice. The other question that is out here kind of high, that regarding the regional centers, do you have a denial guarantee? So the answer to that is yes. If for some reason your I-526E is denied, we will do our best to get the money back. And the way we get your money back is with we basically resell your one share in Apple Mountain Kentucky LLP to the next investor. But let me kind of talk
But the
about
critical thing in that, let me cut you off for a second. The critical thing with the denials is that if there is a denial, it will not be our fault. It will be, source of funds related. And obviously we want to do a great job beforehand and assist you as much as you need or want on that. And be a sounding board and run anything off of us. And, we'll give you checklists and so on. You can work with us. You can work with any lawyer you choose. We can assist them as much as you need. But any denial here is not going to be project related, right? Like the project's already underway. It's already started. There's proof of concept. And most importantly, of course, USCIS has approved it. And so this is a different conversation when you're talking about denials. If there's I hate to be this blunt, but if there's a denial here, it's going to be because of source of funds. That's just the reality of what a project pre-approval means by USCIS.
Yeah, and Mark and I are really proud of our track record. We're a smaller regional center, and so we spend a lot more time, energy, and effort on our projects. But right now we have 100% I-526 approval rate. And one of the safeguards we've put in place, especially for this project, is whoever you use as your immigration attorney, whoever you use to do your source of funds. And of course, we encourage you to work with Sam and his team at BLS. They have a great source of funds team. But unless we have, Sam or Paul as your immigration attorney say, yep, this source of funds, this I-526E packet is good to go. There's no issues. There's no problems. We're not even going to let you invest in our project because we want to make sure that we maintain that 100% success rate. And we want to make sure that you're going to get your temporary visa and permanent visa by being an investor in our project. So that's very important to us. With that said, Paul, I'm going to kick it. Paul, if you want to take the next few questions, I think you can see him, right?
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I got them up here. All right. How long does it take to get an EAD and advanced parole and travel permits after starting the process? This is a very good question. We would file the I-526E concurrent at the same time as the I-485 to adjust status, the I-131 for travel permission, and the I-765 for employment authorization. Customarily and more commonly than not, the advanced parole and the employment authorization are issued on what they call a combo card. That's usually right now about 4 months after filing. Some maybe 5 months or so. Uh, they can also be issued separately. We have no control over that. It's just USCIS. We see some of those where the EAD gets approved very, very quickly in, say, 2 months, and then it may be 5 months, three additional to the advanced parole. But to me, that would be the range, is probably something like 4 months for an EAD. Can I use my friend's S Corp for my EB-5? I think that means investing into a friend's company. If that's not right, then you can clarify it in another question. But uh, that would be an incredibly reckless idea, because the immigration risk for that is off the charts. Investing into an existing business, it would either need to be what's considered a troubled business, which the accounting for that is very onerous to say the least, and incredibly expensive because the standards are so high to establish it as a troubled business, or it would need to be the investment resulting in a 40% expansion to the employment numbers in a business. And quite honestly, like, think of a business that you could get a 40% expansion to their job creation with, $800,000 or $1,050,000. It's just like job creation and investment in business are not linear, right? Like that's why you have multiple $1 trillion plus market cap companies now, so I mean, it would just be like, pardon my directness, it would be insane to invest into an existing business of a friend's, and expect that the immigration and the economic benefits, of a intentionally packaged EB-5 project and investment opportunity would be available in that. It's just not where you want to be. How long did it take for your investors to get approved? The investors started filing late last year. I believe we have 3 families that have EADs and advanced parole now. We're still waiting on project approval, or on I-526E approval. But like we said, we have the project's pre-approval, so as far as you're concerned, that's the critical thing. Hopefully, going back to the EAD advanced parole timeline, hopefully in the next month or two, we'll see action on the early investors I-526E filings, excuse me. And then customarily something like 2 to 3 months following that is when the I-485s, the green cards, get approved and the conditional period starts. You'll then have a 2-year conditional period. In the last 90 days of that, you'll apply for the I-829. When that's approved, you'll get a 10-year green card. After 5 years as a permanent resident, and the 2-year conditional period counts towards this, you'll be eligible, actually also in the 90 days prior to that 5-year anniversary, eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship, if that's the ultimate goal here. But that's what the kind of soup to nuts timeline would be, for someone in one of these.
And then we have one more question in the webinar chat. So what will be the scenario for an investor who do not have 800,000? Are there any loan options or other options? So I'll go ahead and answer the loan option. Unfortunately, we do not have a loan option available at this time. Now, but I'll let Paul kind of talk about how people have used loans to kind of help, from friends and family to kind of, put together their $800,000. So Paul, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've seen others have done to
Yeah.
get there.
So the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 22 explicitly allowed borrowed funds to be counted as lawfully obtained sources of funds for EB-5 investments and qualify someone for I-526E approval. Um, USCIS has taken a pretty hard line on any sort of loan that's affiliated or connected to or organized by or set up by anyone involved. The new commercial enterprise that which would be the Apple Mountain Company, the business Appalachia, as you can see on one side of Ken, and then West Virginia Regional Center, as you can see on the other. If any of those parties, not those particularly, but any of those filling those roles in any project are involved with setting up the loan, USCIS has been very, very difficult about it, to a point where what we said was, unless or until they start treating these like any other loans, we don't think it's responsible to encourage someone to do that. That's the industry consensus right now. I'm not aware of any um, commercially available, like mass marketed sort of thing that's encouraging people to take loans for the EB5 investments. What is definitely more plausible is anything from rolling over a 401k into what's called a self-directed IRA. Um, HELOCs, cash out mortgages, all those sorts of things. Basically, if the lender is a standard commercial bank, it will be the borrowed funds will be treated fairly. Frankly, I think that these semi-affiliated loans are being treated too harshly, but again, we don't want to see anyone get denied. We want to do right by you. It's not like helpful to anyone to start down a path of doing something and then, having a good chance of it blow up in your face. We want to be, like the saying says, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And we want to be smart on the front end, but certainly anything like a HELOC, you know, many companies will even allow you to borrow against either retirement accounts or even potentially, RSUs and things like that. But there's ways to do it if there are underlying assets that you are not wanting to sell, like a home, or not able to sell, like restricted stocks, and those have historically, even to the present, been treated fairly inappropriately by USCIS in recent years.
What about loans or gifts from family or friends?
Yeah, loans and gifts from family and friends are completely viable and legitimate and good and valid sources of funds. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that they will be treated uh, like the donor or lender will be treated the same as the EB5 investor. It will be a request for all of, the information on how this money was earned, years of tax returns, perhaps bank statements, things like that. So that's the consideration. There is, and then that's colored somewhat by geography, right? Like if you have someone in you know, the U.S., brother or sister-in-law, whatever it may be, that's willing to make the loan, they've got great tax returns and able to tell the narrative, then wonderful. If on the other hand, it's your dad overseas or your mom overseas and the funds were earned a long time ago and the tax returns are maybe harder to come by or not available or something like that, we'd have to go on a case by case basis. Certainly, if anything's happening overseas, we encourage everyone to worry or to work with BLS, who has lots of experience and ability to help everybody navigate these things effectively. But yeah, I would just say on that one with gifts and loans from family members, the best thing to do is just, um, treat it like it has to be sourced like your own money. And if the lender or the donor is willing to do that, then great. Nothing should hold you back.
So Sam, if you've talked a lot with a lot of different investors, from your perspective, what questions do you think we haven't answered this evening that would be relative to our audience? And of course, you guys can still ask a few more questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of people they get excited over real estate, right? And Ken, your experience is real estate.
Correct. I'm a real estate
Yeah,
broker in West
real estate.
Virginia and Florida.
Yeah, and they see all these Marriott's brands and everything, and it's rural, and they get excited. But
Hmm.
so what drove you to this? Because when we first spoke, for me, rural is rural. When you have real estate in rural areas, it's quite difficult with occupancies, right? So what drove you? That's what because, or else if you're going to go for real estate, then I'd advise to go into a TA project where the occupancy, the stabilization is going to be on track.
Right. So I did my own AI search and I was using old Gemini, right? And what I wanted to do, is let me show you my screen on kind of what I came up with. And this is I don't know if you guys can see my screenshot. So this is a chart, again, kind of asking what's the rural project risk and featured comparison. So I basically asked, Gemini, hey, right now in the market, we're seeing a lot of rural resort or residential projects. Now, how would that compare, to a rural, high density gala? And we're very, a little more specific, a gala apple orchard. Right. And so really the primary job driver, and again, this is really important because it's not just the investment, it's getting the green card, right? And so we got to meet the requirements of the green card program first so we can get the green card. And then second, we want to make sure we get our money back, right? So that's the second issue after that. So, primary job driver in resort and residential is construction. For ours, we have permanent agriculture and industrial jobs with the pack house and the maintenance of the apple orchard. Zoning and entitlement. I mean, a lot of these resort and residential projects, some have been pre-approved, some have not. Some are complete, some are completely what we call, blue sky. Hey, we're going to build it here, but we got to raise the money. So for our project, we don't have any of that risk. We're already entitled to the land's already entitled for ag use. Economic resilience, it's highly exposed to leisure and real estate cycles. And for those of you who live here in the US, you know what's happening in real estate right now. I mean, it's kind of nobody's market. We're seeing in many of the different real estate sectors where we've kind of peaked out and prices are starting to come down and we just don't have a lot of demand. So, if that's going on all across the country, how many people are going to go on vacation to a rural resort? How many people are going to buy a second or third home out in the middle of nowhere for a resident, for leisure? What's great about ours is, we have high economic resilience because, we're part of the essential national and global food chain. I mean, people need to eat and there's a strong demand for apples. Again, market valuation, but real estate's susceptible to bubbles and spikes, but for farmland, look at where some of the wealthiest families and wealthiest funds, they're buying farmland because it historically serves as stable and it's a hedge against inflation. Commodity prices, Gala is it's mitigated. The developers chose a variant of apples. Gala, which is it's globally in demand and it's a premium variant. Climate risk, we're able to manage our climate risk with crop insurance. One of the things we didn't talk a lot about, but deer love apples, but we have fencing around our entire apple orchard. We have an irrigation system. They're able to pull water, from the mines below it. So, and we have proof of concept. We know we can grow great apples on this land. We've eliminated the production risk. Revenue, every basically 2 to 3 years from the time we plant, we're producing apples. More apples we produce, the more revenue we generate. and an apple orchard goes for 20 to 30 years. And then we also have, B2B revenue. We're not just stuck with business to consumer. They can rent out the pack house to others for fees. And then, so here's the other question people ask, what's the exit strategy? Well, when you own this highly valuable, piece of land with thousands of apple trees producing cash flow for you every year, there's a huge demand for that kind of property. So really, the cash flow itself can pay back the investors, but we also have the option of the developers can go to ironically, they can go to the bank, and the United States Department of Agriculture will provide the owners the banks a government-backed guarantee for agriculture loans. So they could easily do a cash out refi. So in our project, there is no bank involved. There is no other lender. The way we've structured our project is all of you and our EB-5 investors, you're all a partner in a limited partnership. This limited partnership has a first lien position on the land, all the trees, and all the farming equipment. So we are essentially the bank. And then the third option is, again, these things are highly valuable. It's very possible they could get an unsolicited offer for the entire apple orchard, in which case there's a sale, and then we would make sure we'd set aside your funds to make sure that once you got your permanent green card, that we'll be able to pay back your principal. So I thought, again, this is another way you guys can use ChatGPT, AI, Gemini, whatever your preferred platform is, to kind of do some comparisons on different projects. So do we have any other questions?
Pretty much perfect timing. Look at that.
Right on the money. Sam, I turn it back over to you for final words.
Yes. I'm glad some of the people that I've been speaking to actually have joined. Nice familiar names. I know you guys have joined late. I just honestly feel like, we're here to answer a number of your questions. We want to make sure you make the right decisions and, of course, choose the right project. And it is getting quite busy at the moment, and we want to make sure we fully advise you and guide you in that correct way. But it's good for you to understand, if you're doing your due diligence, that you ask the right questions to these AI, because necessarily they're not giving you all the information, and it's really important to read the PPM as well. And that's what we really do, is really dive deep into the PPM and to see how the investors are protected, because there's a number of layers on structures, but we want to make sure things are quite straightforward, so you exactly know when you invest, when you're getting your money back, and of course you're fully aware of the pros and cons. We are getting some delayed questions from Facebook, but I think it's quite late now. And Paul, I thank you, and Ken, and unfortunately we haven't had Marc be present this time around.
Yeah, so what I would say, again, if you're interested in learning more about our project, if you have more legal questions, source of fund questions, please direct those questions first and foremost through Sam. He can vet them, maybe answer them, and if he can and he needs us, we are more than available to jump on another follow-up call with you. So again, thank you guys for spending time with us this evening, and we wish you a good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ken.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.